She says, I trust my own feelings and thoughts. I trust myself. That was one of her posts on Instagram here.
Do you find that as
Trust in the
problematic?
Lord with all thy.
Well, I was gonna contrast it here with what the scriptures teach about trusting yourself. So
Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths.
Yeah, that's that.
So in that little clip, my point was, I think that even if it's just imprecise wording, we believe that we don't lean unto our own selves, and that we're not the center of the universe, but that God is ultimately who we're following and who we commit to and who we literally are, take the name upon him. I've heard that to be baptized and to be made a Christian is to have an identity transplant. It's to allow your old self to die and your new self to be totally defined by the will of Jesus Christ. And so anyway, let's
So do you
go ahead.
Yeah. So with I guess I don't see the controversy here. I trust myself, because I would say that too. I trust myself because I'm the one in connection with God. I trust that my relationship is with God, and I'm in prayer with him. I'm speaking to him as often as can. I believe he's speaking to me. When I say I trust myself, that's what I mean. It doesn't mean I'm rejecting God's authority in my life. It just means that I'm accepting my relationship with God. Therefore, I trust myself. Does that make sense? So
yeah, and I would. This is my. So what you're saying, just to kind of steel man it, is that when you say you trust yourself, you're trusting in that relationship that you have with God.
When I say I trust myself
with God,
I trust God, basically, because I believe God is in communication with me, and I believe my integrity, my desires, my hopes, my passions, I believe those are of God because I believe he taught them to me. So that's what I mean when I trust myself.
So it's funny because I would have a very different perspective. I don't trust myself. I worry all the time. Is this from God or is this just me? And that's why the words of the prophet matter so much to me, because they act as that check, right? I can check my own sort of desires against not just the words of the living prophet, not even of just the living quorum of the 12, but across the entire collective witness of God's prophets throughout time. And to me, it's like, I'm not the only person talking to God. And I trust that these other people have received revelation from God for the world to establish sort of the framework within I operate. And so where I kind of, and again, just to contrast here, I struggle with that sort of I trust myself mentality, because I have to check myself because I'm sinful and I'm prideful and I'm biased. And so I want to seek the God that has revealed himself to the world, not just the God of my own imagination.
Gotcha. So where's my thought going here? So don't you believe that everything good is of God,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I mean when I trust, when good things, good passions that I have, good desires, I trust those because I believe they're from God. I believe I'm a child of God who naturally has a desire to grow and become like him and grow a relationship with him. So again, when I say I trust myself, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I don't think Julie's too far off from that. And if that is what she's saying, is that problematic?
So you're kind of saying that you trust because there are good things out there. You experience them. You intuit that these things are good.
I believe there are natural and taught desires that I have that are from God, purely from God, from the Spirit, that I trust. And so when I say I trust myself, those are the things I'm trusting.
You're trusting in the things that are good in your experience. Is that in kind of your lived experience that these things are good? Because what I guess this is what I'm trying to get at. This is where the disconnect is for me on that, is defining the good, right? Because there's all sorts of things that can seem good, but that are not good. And to me, the collective voice of God's prophets over time act as sort of the testimony to what the good is, what the nature of Christ is, because it's very easy in the world with all the influences to personally be swept up in thinking that which is good is evil and that which is evil is good. And so the scriptures and God's prophets act as sort of a check on my potential to spin off into the social frenzies of the world that will call things good that are not good.
Gotcha. So I think, the issue there is defining what is good, right? To me, the scriptures and Christ, specifically Christ, is what my definition of good is. I believe that prophets exist to interpret that and to continue to teach and guide. It's not perfect. I think they stumble. But my ultimate authority of what is good is Jesus. And
Excellent.
so, again, if that's where Julie is lining up, where I'm lining up here, is that problematic?
No, absolutely not. I think we would agree there. So we would agree that Christ defines what's good. And my thing is that is what prophets and apostles are. They're the special witnesses of Jesus Christ over time, so that I don't create in my own head my Jesus instead of like the real Jesus. Because if the experts on who Jesus are, kind of like the greatest brain surgeons, the special witnesses of Jesus Christ say this is the nature of Jesus Christ, but and my ideas about Christ conflict with that, well, then I'm not following the actual Jesus Christ. I'm following the Jesus Christ of my own imagination, And so that's where I think, and you said yourself that the scriptures are, and that's all the scriptures are. They're the collective witness of God's kind of special authorized servants to make known to the world his mind and will, right? So any other thoughts on that before we kind of move on?
I had a couple. They went somewhere, but so just to clarify, it's not like if that's the framework Julie has, that's not very problematic.
Mm-hmm. No. If Christ is the center, and the prophets are sort of Christ's witnesses that we use to check our self against, no, I would think that we'd line up on that a lot. But let's continue and see some of the things she says.
Just a quick question on that. Do you think the prophets are always lining up with Jesus? Like
No.
They're always teaching what is good? Again, so if that's a reality, there's nuance there, which adds value to personal authority. I think giving perspective to Julie's position.
Oh, I agree. And I would say, like, here's where I'd put it. Again, the 12 greatest brain surgeons in the world are not, they're not infallible. They can and do make mistakes even today. The greatest, like if you literally had the 12 greatest brain surgeons, they would make mistakes. They still wouldn't be able to get it right. But my thing is that if you are going to go against them, I want to hear a good explanation that convinces me why they're wrong, using reason, using science, using, something. But to simply say, well, I feel like God doesn't agree with them, maybe that's the way you feel and you're entitled to that. But I don't find it very convincing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I guess two things on that. I think that's good. Does Julie owe you an explanation?
I think Julie owes,
or does she owe an explanation to God?
I think that if she's out publicly saying things that seem to contradict the brethren, then I would hope that she has a very good explanation as to why. And what I see is oftentimes it falls back on this notion of personal authority as the explanation, where that's not a very good explanation. It's kind of like, well, why do you disagree with the brain surgeons? I mean, if you give me an explanation about the way the molecules in the brain interact and all that, like, then you're making an argument. But if you're just like, well, I claim my personal authority, it's like, well, I trust their authority.
So I'm not aware of an example of where Julie contradicted the brethren and was just kind of threw her hands up in the air and just said personal authority, right? I'm not aware of that. I don't know that exists. So let's look back at the November exclusion policy, right?
Uh-huh.
When Jim Bennett came out and wrote how he felt that was problematic, was that wrong of him to do?
Yeah, I probably would say yes. I believe that that if you have problems with the things that go on within the church, in order to sustain the institutional structure of the church and not to undermine it, you handle those things internally and not through public advocacy. I don't believe that there is I am very careful on my show not to undermine trust in the brethren, because it's kind of like, okay, you have 12 great brain surgeons. you got to be careful that you don't undermine the trust in those 12 brain surgeons, because if you really think that they are the best brain surgeons and you undermine trust in them, people will start to say, well, I'm not trusting them. They're not trustworthy. And then you end up having people who die because they weren't listening to the counsel of the brain surgeons. So the actual institutional trust matters. And that's why, in my opinion, if you have problems with the brethren, which I do, by the way, I don't think they always get it right. And I have things. And if people ask me, I'll give them my honest opinion on where they're wrong on certain things, but I don't push it. Like, it definitely isn't something I'm doing frequently. And my overall tenor is to support them in every way that I can, especially in public, because I do believe that people should be listening to them, because I do believe that they are trustworthy, even if they might be fallible.
Gotcha. So just to clarify, would you say it is wrong to publicly oppose ideas and practices from church leadership?
Yes.
Okay. So, like, let's pull out interracial marriage. Members should not have pushed back against that publicly.
No, I would say they should push back against that internally within the church. They should be
Internally
talking to their
within the
bishops,
church.
their stake presidents, their priesthood leaders, saying, I am really uncomfortable with this.
What if that doesn't do anything? What if that doesn't go anywhere? Shouldn't the goal of the church to be to get it into the best spot possible as we prepare it for the return of the Savior, for the second coming? Why is it wrong to express our frustrations or maybe our concerns publicly? I don't see why that,
because
could
what's
be
our
wrong.
I would question this. What's our stewardship? I don't have stewardship over the whole church.
But do you
I
need
do have-
stewardship to have an opinion?
No. I would say that my opinion when it comes to the general matters of the church is to sustain the brethren and to try and further the work that they're trying to put out. If I think they're wrong on some certain point, well, yeah, I might make that known internally, but publicly, I'm going to try and work to further again, going back to this thing, the danger is this, is that if I begin to go and make my points of disagreement, which are very small, I agree with the brethren on, like, why would I spend my time in public talking about the one thing that I disagree with or the two things that I disagree with, rather than talk about all the things that I do agree with? A person who sustains their leaders is trying to help them in all the things that you agree. And if you disagree, it's like, let's go take care of that in-house. It's kind of like, you don't talk bad about your wife. If you have a problem with what your wife did, you don't do it in public. You go into your room, you talk about it quietly, but because it messes with the institutional integrity of the church, and it hurts people because they lose trust in the brethren.
One is either for the kingdom of God and stands in defense of God's prophets and apostles, or one stands opposed.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, if you want more content, including the podcast, go to thoughtful-faith.com. Thanks for watching.